People have this view of Tyson being an animal, knocking people out in the first round. But I think that Tyson's story is really a tragedy of a kind boy growing up in a bad environment where his weakness was exploited, alongside a lack of parental guidance and circumstance made him into the man that he became, and was more of a defense mechanism than a conscious process. And in this video, we'll examine the rise and fall of Mike Tyson and how he's worked to redeem himself, and the lessons that we can all take from that. Mike Tyson's early years were a roller coaster of crime and violence. On the streets of Brooklyn, New York, Mike grew up in a decent neighborhood at the time, but at the age of 10, Mike moved to Brownsville, a rough part of town, and that's kind of where his story begins.
And we went from Bedford-Stuyvesant, we went to Brownsville. And Brownsville was just, it was just, whoa, real aggressive.
Tyson lived with his mother, brother, and sister, where everyone in his family was gifted academically except for Mike, who looked up to the guys on the corner and wanted to be a street guy, because you don't need to be book smart to be a street guy. From a young age, Mike was beat up, bullied, and constantly having people taking his stuff.
I was always getting beat up and bullied, and people were taking stuff from me.
Which further reinforced Mike wanting to become like the guys that he would see on the corner, because people didn't mess with him, and that's what he wanted for himself. Mike had a strong dislike of being a bitch, a punk, and a victim.
They did whatever they wanted to me, because I'm a fucking bitch, because I'm a punk, because I'm a fucking victim.
An important theme that will also show up in his adult years. Initially, Mike didn't want to become a boxer.
Did you want to be a boxer? Was that something that you wanted to be?
And we see this with a lot of high-achieving people, where they have a talent and pursue said talent, even if it's not what they're passionate about. Growing up, Mike was very passionate about pigeons.
Pigeons were big. You know, there were guys over here that had pigeons. They had Danny had pigeons over here, Chucky. All these guys had pigeons on this side too.
Which I guess is a very New York thing.
Refuge from this harsh life on the street is often found on the rooftops.
Better to be on the roof because on the street is too much trouble.
When in his first fight, an older kid took one of his birds and ripped the poor bird's head off.
So he took my birds, he ripped my bird's head off, and he hit me with the fucking bird.
R.I.P. And then hit Mike with the bird. And I'm not sure if it was the buildup of being bullied for so long or the fact that an innocent animal was killed, but this was the catalyst for Mike's fighting career. Not fighting for himself or his ego, but fighting to stop people from taking from him, fighting to stop the bullying.
I wanted to be a street guy so bad because I was always getting beat up and bullied and people were taking stuff from me.
And through this traumatic event, he realized that he could fight really well.
I never fought nobody before. I fought back, and you know what? I can fight real good.
And after that, all the kids in the neighborhood wanted a piece of little Mike.
So after that, everybody would bring other kids from different neighborhoods around to fight me for money.
And then Mike saw this as an opportunity to make money and to maybe even gain some respect in a place where that's all that really matters. So we had this young kid who's afraid of fighting, but good at it, and then starts to hang around the wrong crowd, as Mike was later arrested over 30 times before becoming a teenager. And while locked up, Mike continued to fight. For a boy from the hood that wasn't good at reading and writing, fighting was the one thing that he excelled at. Mike describes his whole life as being violent, but not being a violent person.
My whole life has been violent, and I'm not a violent person.
1979, after a chance encounter with former heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali at the juvenile detention center that Mike was locked up in, Mike saw how the staff reacted to Ali. Tyson remarked that, "I bet no one picks on him."
When they see Ali, they cry, they don't know what to do. I said, fuck. I said, I bet you nobody picks on him.
Just like the street dudes that Mike looked up to when he was younger, really reinforcing the fact that for Mike, fighting wasn't what he enjoyed, but it's how he made money and gained respect.
That's the only thing I thought I could do.
So it seems like Mike had a new goal. Months later, in his new facility, Mike meets Irish Bobby Stewart, a juvenile detention center counselor and former boxer that won the National Golden Gloves tournament at light heavyweight in 1974.
Stewart told the 12-year-old if he wanted to box, he'd have to straighten out.
That starts teaching Mike how to box after showing him the ropes due to Mike's reputation as a troublemaker.
He's bad. He's uncontrollable, fighting everything. He doesn't go his way. He said, Mr. Stewart, he said, I want to become a fighter.
From Irish Bobby, Mike is introduced to Cus D'Amato, who was one of the boxing world's most legendary managers and trainers.
So when Stewart's pupil Mike Tyson showed real promise, it was only natural that he would bring Tyson to D'Amato for a tryout.
Where Mike's first thoughts had nothing to do with learning how to box, but of robbing these people.
I see Cus's house, this mansion, this Victorian mansion, I think to myself, I'm gonna rob these white motherfuckers.
Because he still got some of the hood in him, because where Mike was from, you just take whatever you want, and the concept of working hard and earning what you want was not really emphasized. At this time, Mike was the same scared kid on the inside, no matter how much his body physically began to grow. But after spending time with Cus D'Amato, Mike's confidence began to grow, and maybe it began to grow too much.
Fucking blowing my ego up. It's like, he made me believe that I was better than everybody, which was wrong.
Despite the perfect image we are shown of Cus that's always portrayed as saving Mike from the system and the street life, Mike went from fighting for respect and money to fighting for Cuz's approval.
I became a slave to him. It's every word I needed him to say. Is this okay? Can I do this? He became my conscience.
Larry Holmes fight with Muhammad Ali. After the Larry Holmes fight with Muhammad Ali, Mike later decides to get revenge on Larry Holmes after a little bit of prompting from Cuz.
So I talked to Ali on the phone. I said, when I get big, I'm going to get him for you. I'm going to revenge you. I'm going to restore your honor.
Fast forward several years, and Mike makes his amateur debut after winning gold at the Junior Olympics in 1981 and 1982, going pro. By 1985, Mike made his professional boxing debut at 18 years old, where he would go on to have 15 bouts in the first year, most of which ended by knockout in the first round, becoming champ. And by 1986, at the age of 20 years old, Mike was given his first ever title fight against Trevor Berbick for the World Boxing Council WBC Heavyweight Championship.
Bangs the body. Wow, with that uppercut is Tyson. Catches him with a light left hook, and he goes down. His legs may be shut. They are. As Trevor Berbick falls back in the ropes. I don't know if he's going to be able to continue. Let's do it. And he's counted out.
Winning the title by TKO, technical knockout, in the second round, and also becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history. Mike would also add the WBA and IBF titles the year later in 1987, and it seemed like Mike had the world in his palms. That same year, Nintendo released Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, one of the most iconic games ever made, which sold more than 1 million copies. On January 22nd, 1988, Mike defeated Larry Holmes by KO in the 4th round, fulfilling his vow to revenge Muhammad Ali that he promised so many years prior. That once scared kid had finally made something of himself and was acknowledged by all. I believe at this point that Mike had achieved the goal that he had set out to achieve initially at such a young age, and felt that he did what Cuz wanted, almost as if fulfilling his last wish. But then, after that, Mike did what he wanted to do, and that reflected both his upbringing in the projects as well as what Cuz taught him, which was that he was better than everyone else. And that was great advice in a boxing ring, but not necessarily the best way to approach everyday life, relationships, boundaries, and dealing with authority. Mike's fall, February 7th, 1988. That same year, Mike married Robin Givens, an actress, model, and director, who at the time was famous for her role in the ABC sitcom series Head of the Class. Being a successful, rich, and famous young man, I don't really think Mike knew how to approach relationships with the opposite sex, especially after being so engrossed in the boxing world for so many years, where he spent the majority of his time either sleeping or training, and then repeating that process over and over again. Not to mention that his home life was not the most nurturing environment, so he probably didn't have a good measure on how to have a stable and healthy relationship, as the couple was later divorced October 1988. During this same period, Mike was in a contract dispute between Don King, one of the most well-known boxing promoters of all time, and Bill Caton, Mike's longtime manager, and Kevin Rooney, the man many credit for honing Mike's boxing after Cuz D'Amato's death. And as a result of losing Kevin Rooney, Mike's iconic polish, utilizing phenomenal head movement and footwork leading into his combination punching, started to fade. Don King, alongside being a boxing promoter, has been involved in several historic boxing matchups, such as the Rumble in the Jungle and the Thrilla in Manila. Don King has promoted some of the greatest boxers the world has ever seen, and also been sued by some of those greats. Muhammad Ali. In 1982, Muhammad Ali sued Don King for underpaying him $1.1 million for his fight with Larry Holmes. Larry Holmes alleged that King had cheated him out of more than $10 million in fight purses over the course of his career. Tim Witherspoon. In 1987, two-time world heavyweight champion Tim Witherspoon, WBC and WBA, was threatened with being blackballed if he did not sign exclusive contracts with Don King and his stepson Carl, and sued for $25 million in damages. Unfortunately, the situation with Mike wasn't any better, as Mike would eventually end up suing Don King as well for a reported amount of $100 million after alleging that King had cheated him for more than a decade. In his dealings with Don King, Mike was once again put into the same situation that he would often find himself in as when he was a kid, where he's being taken advantage of by someone older that he trusts. His money from all his fights is literally being stolen from him, and yet, despite being considered the baddest man on the planet, achieving more than he could ever imagine, he's still powerless. So we had this highly publicized failed relationship with Robin Givens taking his toll on Mike. Add to this his failed relationships with his longtime manager and trainer, and then sprinkle a little bit of extra greedy boxing promoter, and you have the perfect storm. 1990. Buster Douglas match. With his personal life and professional life a mess, Mike stepped into the ring on February 11th, 1990 to square off against Buster Douglas for the undisputed championship in Tokyo. And despite catching Douglas with an uppercut in the 8th round that knocked him to the ground, Douglas was able to quickly recover and ended up landing his own uppercut on Mike, alongside a 4-punch combo that knocked Mike down for the first time in his career, and has been considered by many to be one of the most shocking upsets in modern sports. Despite the shocking loss, Mike said that losing to Douglas was the greatest moment of his career. I needed that fight to make me a better person and fighter. I have a broader perspective of myself and boxing. False victory, and things were finally starting to look up for the champ, as Mike was able to win his next 2 bouts by first-round knockouts. And with his victory over Henry Tillman, 1984 Olympic heavyweight gold medalist, avenging his only loss as an amateur. 1991, grape trial in prison. However, in 1991, things did not look too good, as Mike was arrested in July for the rape of 18-year-old Desiree Washington in an Indianapolis hotel room, later being convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison with 4 years of probation, but was later released in March of 1995 after serving less than 3 years of the sentence. Comeback. Fortunately, no sports story would be complete without a comeback, and Mike was able to make his return to boxing after being paroled from prison and was quickly able to reclaim both the WBC and WBA belts 1 year later. Tyson vs. Holyfield. On November 9th, 1996, Mike suffered a loss to Evander Holyfield by technical knockout in the 11th round, becoming the second boxer to win a heavyweight championship 3 times. Tyson vs. Holyfield 2. On June 28, 1997, one of the most controversial events in modern sports occurred during the rematch between Mike and Evander Holyfield, when the fight was stopped at the end of the 3rd round and Mike was disqualified for biting Holyfield on both ears. Removing a piece of Holyfield's right ear, which was found on the ring floor after the fight. Not Mike's brightest moment, as he was fined several $1 million and his boxing license was revoked on July 9th, 1997. Luckily, this ban was not permanent and Mike's boxing license was restored 1 year later. The years following, Mike continued boxing, but he also continued getting in trouble, culminating in a bout against Lennox Lewis on January 22nd, 2002, where Mike was dominated by Lewis and knocked out with a right hand in the 8th round, eventually retiring from the sport of boxing in 2005, but continuing to do exhibition bouts, with his most notable being an 8-round exhibition bout with 4-division world champion Roy Jones Jr. in November 2020, with the fight going the full 8 rounds and being declared a draw. Legacy and life after boxing. No one can deny the legacy that Mike Tyson has had in boxing and the world itself. Was he perfect? No. Was he violent? Yes. But I genuinely believe that he has tried to improve himself, and even during the research for this video, his mentality has changed and shifted as he's had to navigate his life.
There have been people in his past that have taken advantage of him, and he doesn't hold a grudge.
You think you're great now. Watch how great you're going to be when you learn compassion and empathy.
It's just his journey and all the ups and downs have been broadcasted to the world, and every slip or fall was magnified several fold. To me, he's that same scared kid that would rather play with pigeons.